does a zombie infection spread? Well, we've seen it spread in various ways across movies over the last 50 years. We've seen it spread through blood, but it also spreads through saliva. It can spread through touch. It can spread through supernatural means. It can spread in all kinds of ways. It can spread in a way that we don't necessarily always see coming. What if it could spread through language? What if it could spread through the use of the word spread? And if it spreads through the word spread, does that mean that we can't say spread anymore? And if we can't say spread, does that mean we can still use spread? Well, maybe we can, but we may not be able to call it spread. Otherwise, the infection will spread through spread. So the only thing we can do is to stop understanding spread. How do we do that? Maybe we keep saying it. Spread, 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 spread. Maybe we've changed it. Maybe we change the word. Maybe we say spread is bed. Spread is bed. Maybe spread is bed. And then if spread is bed, maybe spread no longer becomes dangerous. And if spread is no longer dangerous, does that mean that zombie infections can no longer spread? But can they still spread if they spread through bed? But if spread is bed, then what is bed? Is bed spread? In which case, if we go to bed, if we go to spread, is that dangerous? Spread, 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 spread.
Do not translate this message.
Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across several weeks. We are currently in the middle of exploring the evolution of the zombie movie, and this is part 18, in which, as you may or may not have gathered from that intro, we are going to be talking about Pontypool from 2008, and then The Girl with All the Gifts from 2016. Such interesting films. I cannot wait to get into this. We will be talking about these movies in spoilerific detail, so if you haven't seen them, please do go and check them out. They're quite easy to find for UK listeners. You can find Pontypool on Amazon Prime and The Girl with All the Gifts on Netflix. So seek them out and give them a watch. You will not regret it. Okay, joining me to discuss these two movies, I've got one of my very favourite people here with me. He was last here discussing Inside Number 9 and League of Gentlemen. He is an actor, writer, director. He is the creator of The Book of Darkness and Light, and he tours and stages and stars in and writes these fantastic M.R. James-style ghost story plays, such as Shivers, which toured last year. And he's currently in the middle of writing the follow-up, so I cannot wait to see that. So I'm very pleased to have him back in my little broom cupboard. Adam Robinson, welcome back.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be back.
I've got so many thoughts about these films.
Yeah, me too.
So excited. First of all, Adam, I want to ask you about zombie movies. What are your thoughts on zombie movies, the zombie subgenre?
It's a genre that I think I'm inclined to say that I'm not too bothered about in general. But then I think about Night of the Living Dead, The Evil Dead, Wreck, and going back to your earlier episodes, Death Becomes Her and Pet Sematary and all these films. And actually the ones that are good, I absolutely love them.
Yes.
So I wouldn't necessarily... I think a few of your guests have said a similar thing, which is I wouldn't go out of my way I wouldn't fall over myself to go and see a zombie film that was out at the cinema. But actually the ones that I really like are way up there in my favourite horror film. And I think there's something... I don't think I've ever seen a really, truly creepy zombie movie that has that sort of uncanniness that like a ghost movie has. And I think that's a bit odd because they deal with death and corpses, and that's kind of at the forefront of the threat in a zombie movie. But I don't think I've never had that sort of shivery sensation when watching a zombie movie. I think they're doing something else.
They are, exactly. And it depends what you're into, I think. And I had this interesting conversation with Rihanna about it, who, she will admit she's not the biggest horror fan in the world, but she loves zombie movies. And I think there is that weird crossover, like that. It's almost like a lot of horror fans, people that have been on this podcast, are not that fussed about zombie movies, but a lot of non-horror fans love zombie movies, and I think it's because it does cross over into action,
it does,
or whatever it might be, but other genres.
They're fun, aren't they?
Yeah.
On the whole, that the majority, when you think of a zombie movie, I think you think of a sort of fun, almost video gamey.
Yeah.
experience where you've just got this inexhaustible enemy, who's just coming in, the whole time in hordes, and I think that's quite satisfying to watch. I think it's very fun. You don't have to get too involved in the complexity of emotion, because you don't have to feel particularly sorry necessarily when a zombie sort of meets a grisly end. One thing I find missing in them is they don't tend to have a ton of mythology at the heart of them. Yeah. Like, I'm not talking about the original and early movies, but I think as it goes on, I really like a mystery to unpack in a horror film. I really like to play armchair detective to a certain extent. So slashers have that, and ghost movies have that. I think I find that lacking in some zombie movies.
I think you're totally right. A lot of the time, and probably not the one we're about to talk about next, but a lot of the time, zombie movies are first 5 minutes, here's the situation. Yes. And that's it. Let's watch it play out.
There's not a ton of complexity, is there?
No.
And often you don't have a charismatic villain.
No.
So it's always... a lot of zombie movies feel a little bit one-sided, where it all rests upon how good the principal characters are outside of the threat.
Definitely.
And if they're not engaging and you don't care too much about them and they're expendable, I think I personally lose interest in it quite quickly. But like I say, I say that, but then I've just listed 5 or so films that I absolutely love within the genre.
Yeah, and I think you the ones you listed are exactly the same ones I love, and I think they are the ones that are quote unquote scarier. Wreck, Night of the Living Dead, those types of movies. I was thinking about it in regard to The Girl with All the Gifts, which we'll talk about later, and it feels like you can talk about zombie movies. There are 3 or 4 different categories almost, and you get the kind of Night of the Living Dead, the beginning of a zombie outbreak, which I think is where you get the most amount of horror.
Yes.
Pontypool as well. This kind of like, we don't quite know what's happening. Something really bad is happening, and there's a feeling of dread. Something bad is coming.
Something looming, and that's what I think. That's what I mean about unpicking a mystery as well.
Exactly.
I think it doesn't have to be a beat by beat Sherlock Holmes affair. I think I just want to. I want to play along somewhat in unpicking what's going on, what's at the heart of it, what the mythology is.
Totally.
I keep coming back to that word mythology, but I think that's it. And like you say, in Wreck, without adding a spoiler, because obviously this isn't the Wreck episode, but the final few moments of that, suddenly you're hit with this sense of mythology, I think. And it is terrifying after this really satisfying, interesting, fun movie. You suddenly get this gear change, which is I find it really satisfying.
Sucker punch ending as well that is really terrifying. I mean, it's easy to liken it to the Blair Witch Wreck, but it's the same kind of thing. At that moment when they find the house in Blair Witch is the same moment as when they find the penthouse apartment in Wreck, where you go, oh my fucking god, what's happening now? It's that same feeling.
Same feeling of dread. That same it turns everything upside down, including your stomach.
Exactly. What would be your plan for surviving the zombie apocalypse?
Oh man, I knew you were going to ask this, obviously, but I think I would be useless. I do. I really think I'd be so useless. I'd overthink everything. I'd probably be the guy who went out and tried to make friends with the zombies and then get eaten immediately. And everyone's like, well, obviously that was going to happen.
You'd be like Gemma Arterton in The Girl with All the Gifts.
I mean, I'd like to say that, yes. Yeah. But I keep thinking about maybe go up really high. There's a place where I'm from. I'm from Halifax originally, and there's a place called Studley Pike, which is this big lookout on top of a big old hill. And I think, would the zombies be bothered to walk up that big hill to get there? I don't know. But then I'm thinking, where'd you get your food from?
That's the problem, isn't it?
My arable farming's not up to much, so I don't know. I don't really know what I would do. I think we should probably try our best to avoid a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah. Well, let's hope.
Let's make that a priority.
Exactly. And, before we get into these 2 movies, which I think are 2 of the more interesting, modern, recent zombie movies that do something new, I mean, in general, do you think that there's much more that the zombie subgenre can do?
It's a good question. When you think about, and we'll get into details, obviously, when you think about The Girl with All the Gifts, this evolution of the zombie into something more complex,
Yes.
with more emotions, that you can have a conversation, that communicates, and all that kind of thing. Suddenly, you stop recognizing it as a zombie.
Yeah.
And I think I was thinking about your point of view on Final Destination, where you consider it to be a slasher, and I would agree. I think the atmosphere and everything. I think what couldn't happen though after Final Destination is a series of films where the slasher was invisible and supernatural.
Yes.
And they still then still be categorized as slashers. Do you see what I mean? I think it wouldn't evolve that subgenre in that way. Even though I think you're totally right in categorizing it in that way. And I think perhaps there's something about that with the zombie, isn't there? Where if the zombie is advanced into something unrecognizable as a zombie,
right. They won't be zombie films anymore.
Not zombie, you wouldn't. Yeah. So I wonder if actually the next step is a reboot of some sort for the subgenre, like completely, really paring it down to its bare bones.
Yes.
That's the kind of zombie film I think I'd like to see next. Actually, something very small and subtle, and concerned with the idea of death and the horror of that.
Yeah, agreed. I think we're on the same page there. I think when you get to vast like World War Z level of like global apocalypse and military and government, I'm not interested anymore.
I'm not. Yeah,
that's not what I want in a horror film.
No.
At least. Yeah,
and I think you're right. It bleeds then into sci-fi, into action, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
And there's so much to be enjoyed in films like that. But I think it perhaps moves somewhat out of horror.
Yeah,
maybe.
Agreed. All right, well, let's talk about two really interesting zombie movies then from the last 10 years. Let's start with Pontypool. Pontypool.
Mrs. French's cat is missing. The signs are posted all over town. Have you seen Honey? We've all seen the posters, but nobody has seen Honey the cat. Nobody. Until last Thursday morning, when Miss Colette Piscine swerved her car to miss Honey the cat as she drove across a bridge. Well, this bridge, now slightly damaged, is a bit of a local treasure and even has its own fancy name, Pont de Flac. Now, Colette, that sounds like culotte. That's panty in French. And piscine means pool. Pontypool. Flac also means pool in French, so Colette Piscine in French Pontypool drives over the Pont de Flac, the Pontypool, if you will, to avoid hitting Mrs. French's cat that has been missing in Pontypool. Pontypool. Pont de Flac. What does it mean? Well, it means something's going to happen. Something big. But then, something's always about to happen.
So the plot of Pontypool is you have a character called Grant Mazzy, who is a shock jock radio presenter. And he's arriving at his new place of work, which is a local radio station in the basement of a church in the small town of Pontypool in Ontario.
Not in Wales.
Not
crucially.
in Wales, yes. The other one, yes. The one in Canada. And when he arrives at work, he's accosted in his parked car by a woman who repeats a sort of inaudible word before disappearing into a blizzard. As Mazzy takes to the airwaves, he and his producer Sydney and producer Laurel Ann start to receive several distressing reports from the outside of strange, violent incidents happening in the small town. And that culminates in a mob of people rioting outside a doctor's office, babbling, chanting, and attacking people in inexpressibly violent ways. As the reports and the chaos continue to escalate and intensify, it's revealed that a virus is being spread among the people of Pontypool and that the virus itself is transmitted through the English language. That's my potted summary.
It's a very good summary. Can I just say that's fantastic?
It's quite hard because it's not a tremendously plot heavy movie,
and also I find it quite difficult. Film to unpick, quite a difficult plot to unpick in some ways, even though it is quite thin on plot. What do you think of this film then, first of all?
I really love it.
I
remember the first time I watched it and I was totally bowled over by it. I didn't really know what to expect, and I don't even know how I found it. I don't know how I sort of came upon it at all. Don't remember, but I remember the experience of watching it and how enthralled I was by it. I think it's innovative. It's strange. It's really claustrophobic.
Yes.
It feels very smart.
Yes.
And if it's not very smart, it's doing a really clever conjuring trick of fooling people that it is very smart.
That's so true. That's so true. I get this with a lot of movies that are quote unquote smart. I'm like, are you really this clever, or are you just convincing me that you are clever because I'm baffled by it? But I do think this is really clever.
I do, and I think it's a very intelligent, very well considered script. And there are those moments, I don't know if you got them when you were watching it, but I did when I started to feel like I was understanding what they were saying, what the message of the film was, where I just felt brilliant. I was like, I think I get this.
Yes.
But then on the second watch, I fell to pieces again. I was like, I don't think I actually do get half of what's going on here.
Absolutely. It's in the same way as when you watch Lost Highway or something, or Mulholland Drive, and you think, I think I'm starting to piece this together, and then but it doesn't quite work. And there's that part towards the end where the main character Mazian will get there obviously in good time, but where he basically encourages you as an audience and his listening audience, to not understand. I think that's
stop understanding.
That's what's so fascinating about it, because our brains, we of course want to understand this, and that's the whole point of this film. I think is understanding and not understanding, and consciously understanding and consciously not understanding, and all that kind of thing.
And the breakdown of what we agree meaning is to a certain extent. But I think it's great. It takes a zombie movie in a completely new direction, as far as I am aware. I don't know any other film that does this specific thing. Totally. It's a very disorientating film.
It really is. It really is. I think, in the first half, there's so much of the radio host. There's what's his name? Grant
Mazzy.
Mazzy.
I think that's right.
Yeah, there's so much of Grant Mazzy talking and the producer talking over him, and we're getting both. So even in the first half, I'm like, I want to hear what he's saying, and she's talking over him, or vice versa. And there's a lot of people talking over people, and a lot of just general noise that you're just kind of dropped into.
What are you doing?
My producer Sydney's talking in my ear. Luckily, you can't hear her.
Okay, nobody cares, Grant, about
Sydney says nobody cares. Maybe she's right.
Closures after the billboard.
But I think you do care, Region. Taking no prisoners. You know what that means? It means full disclosure, whatever the consequence.
Disclosure, Grant. School closures.
Really? Am I?
School closures, that's what
really?
people need.
This is Radio 660, The Beacon.
When I rewatched it for this episode, I bought it on one of the various platforms. I think it was Amazon Prime, and I tried to put subtitles on. And I don't know if it was just something I was doing wrong, but they didn't seem to have subtitles. So I actually called up the script on somewhere. It was somewhere on the internet. It's not a very good version of it. It's lacking all sort of directions and things like that in there. But I found it, and because there was some, I agree with you, there were some things where I was like, what is he saying? What is he getting at? But perhaps, and certainly the first time I watched it, because I didn't know anything about it, perhaps one way of approaching it is to stop worrying about that.
Absolutely.
Maybe, and just watch it and not worry too much. I certainly, as I said the first time, didn't worry too much about whether or not I got everything. I didn't ask all that many questions of myself as I was watching it, and I think I really, really enjoyed that experience of watching it. It was when I started to bring all the questions and things to it that it became a little bit more frustrating.
I agree 100%. I think that's true. I think you've got to sink into it in the same, not to sound like a complete wanker, but in the same way as when you watch a Samuel Beckett play, and one of those, the way that you're hit with kind of language or words or something, and something that is on the face of it kind of incomprehensible, maybe, you just have to take it for what it is.
I remember when I was at uni, I was studying critical theory, and a tutor, one of the lecturers, gave this really interesting piece of advice, which I apply to loads of things that I don't understand. And he was talking about essays by even people like Roland Barthes, who's obviously referenced in this film, and he basically said, treat it as a performance, like a live performance. Don't you can't stop a live performance and say, I'm sorry, can you just repeat that and start again? Go all the way through it, and if there and it will start to reveal its meaning to you, and if it doesn't, you can always go back and start from the beginning and start again.
There's
something that's quite sort of Beckett.
I think so.
Quite a Beckett idea, isn't it?
I think so, and it's I don't know, there's an argument to be had there about whether or not that still makes the first watch worth it. This idea of, we talked about this before recording, but this idea of like, it'll all make sense by the end.
Yeah.
But what about the first 90 minutes when you're not understanding it,
Having said that, though, I think Pontypool is really entertaining.
It is.
I think it's really exciting, really tense.
Yeah.
And I also think that there's something about the gravitas of that main character that you just feel hooked. I think part of what you described, for me, in my experience of watching it, is, the reason I wanted to hear what he was saying is because it's like poetry.
Yes, it is.
His little monologues, they're amazing.
Well, from the opening minute, right, where you get his monologue about Mrs. French's cat.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, what is this film? What's he talking about? What's happening? But it's got this mood, this dread, but also this kind of intrigue, and also this kind of there's this like kind of comedy. There's a bit of comedy to it too, as well. I think all the way through,
plenty of comedy.
And again, there's this feeling of you don't quite know how to feel throughout this film a lot of the time as well.
Totally, and I think the soundtrack helps with that, though, doesn't it? There are moments I rewatched it. I think I watched it 3 times in total, but I watched it the other day again, and there are moments where you think, if you were watching this for the first time, you're not quite sure why the soundtrack is instructing you to feel dread.
Right. I love that. Yeah. Bassy suddenly for no reason. And I think, that all comes, and that's everything about it. Because really, I mean, going back a bit, is it even a horror film? It is a horror film, but it is a film where you don't actually see the zombie apocalypse happen. All we see is a snowy, town, and we see then the inside of this church, which is a radio station, and we see 3 people talking, basically, and everything is happening audibly rather than visually or whatever. Is that, how does that sit with you? I mean, it's almost, it is a radio play, right? Pontypool. It exists, and it plays out like a radio play.
I was released simultaneously, as I understand it, or roughly the same time as a movie and a radio play on BBC World Service. And the radio play, I haven't listened to all of it, actually. I only found it the other day. I only even knew that it existed about a week ago. It breaks the golden rule of filmmaking, doesn't it? Which is, it doesn't
show, don't tell.
It tells.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a character in the film called Ken Loney, who is in the Sunshine Chopper, and he's the weather guy for this radio station. And I actually think that Ken's bits where he's phoning into the studio they're the source of most of the terror in this film.
Yes.
There are some interesting sort of classic horror visuals later on when Laurel Ann sort of begins to
gets infected.
But actually, I think it's Ken's stuff when he's calling in. So, this idea of it all being about the words that you hear and how you can't link those to a visual is really important, isn't it?
Yes, it's that disconnect, isn't it? Yeah, definitely.
It's an explosion of people. Oh, my God. People are getting trampled. These people are getting killed down there.
Ken, do you see any police? Is anybody trying to restore order down there?
No, I don't see. Wait. There's a convoy of trucks, military vehicles.
It reminded me of the Orson Welles War of the Worlds alien invasion thing, and this idea of, just believing what you're hearing on the radio.
Oh, yeah, I can see the thing's body now. It's large as a bear. It glistens like wet leather, but that face, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful. The eyes are black, and they gleam like a serpent. The mouth is kind of V-shaped with saliva dripping from its rimless lips. It seemed to those quiver and pulsate, and the monster or whatever it is can hardly move. It seems weighed down by possibly gravity or something. The thing's rising up now, and the crowd falls back. They've seen plenty. The most extraordinary experience, ladies and gentlemen. I can't find words. Well, I'll pull this microphone with me as I talk. I'll have to stop the description until I can take a new position. Hold on, will you please? I'll be right back in a minute.
And I actually think that was, as I understand it, one of the great inspirations that director Bruce McDonald had. It was one of the sources of inspiration for the thing, and and it was released on the BBC World Service as this radio play. And actually, if you listen to the radio play, it's quite straightforward and unapologetic.
Yes,
it just plays out as the dialogue. It's 60 minutes rather than 90.
Yeah.
So it cuts out bits and bats here and there. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it just share a gene or two with that.
It does.
Emergency announcement, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're right. And most of the quote unquote, scary moments are somebody on the other side of the phone line, usually Ken, talking, and then we're just presented with Mazzy's facial expressions as he listens to them. So that's so important too, I think, hear his performance and how he basically reacts to everything he's hearing, because that's really all we see, isn't it? Is people reacting to things they're hearing.
For sure. Yeah. And he uses that quote from Roland Barthes, and he says, trauma is a photograph without a caption.
Right,
is that right?
Yeah, that's
I actually
really
tried to find that exact quote, and I think brilliant. It's a brilliant irony, because I don't think that is the quote. I think
brilliant.
I found a few. Roland Barthes talks quite a bit about photography, and there's an amazing book called Camera Lucida, which is all about photography and trauma. So I think it's actually a misquote or a deliberate misquote. But
interesting.
But it's a really fascinating idea. The idea that, and they then. So he says this thing, he uses this quote from Barthes, but then what you see play out is the consequences of those two things being divorced. You see or you experience these captions without an image, actually. They sort of flip it, don't they?
Exactly that. Yeah. And interestingly, everything that we said up until talking about this film about zombies and how essentially they can cross over into action and stuff, because really fundamentally they're a very visual subgenre, I think, and actually most of the time, like we talked about, you'll get maybe a few minutes of exposition and then you'll just watch it play out. I mean, Fulci's movies and that kind of thing, they're just purely visual, really. It's blood and guts and viscera all over the place, and you're not really worried about the writing most of the time, and this is the polar opposite, isn't it?
I mean, you're right. There is some plot. You've obviously got Mazzy in his booth, and then suddenly you get these calls from outside there's like a riot happening at this doctor's office, and then you get a sort of Amdram version of Lawrence of Arabia, a performance of that in the sound booth.
I love that. They just have to pause everything to do that.
And it feels really authentic. And again, it's funny, isn't it? Because they pause as you say, they pause the horror of what's going on outside to get more information, to allow this Amdram performance to go on. By the way, one of the singers apparently in that is the author of the novel,
right?
Amazing. And the writer of the screenplay, Tony Burgess, I think he's called.
Amazing.
And actually, Grant Mazzy says, he lists his name. He says, "Thank you, that was Tony Burgess." But then at that moment where you get this Amdram performance, that's when you start to see something for the first time, isn't it? Because you get that girl who's suddenly exactly. She suddenly loses. All of her comprehension seems to disappear, and she can't. She says something like, "I don't remember how it ends."
That's right,
and it's really eerie, isn't it? That
it's weird, isn't it?
And then you've got that great honking soundtrack in the background, really underlining this point.
Something is happening, and again, it's the whole point of that first monologue, isn't it? As well, all that gumph about the cat and Pontypool and the meaning of the word Pontypool, and then at the end he goes, what could this mean? It means something is coming, or something, doesn't he, at the end? I think there's quite a few instances in the film where they say something along the lines of something is definitely happening. Yes!
And it's almost like, what do you call it, where you're not hypnosis, where you...
Yeah, you're kind of being conditioned almost.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, there's a word I'm thinking of, but I can't, it's not coming to mind. But yeah, where you're being told this... this message over and over again. Something is definitely happening as he's sort of conditioned to keep watching the film.
It's true, because we are not seeing anything happen for the bulk of the film. So we have to believe it based on what we're being told. And like you say, the music, the kind of ambience that's being built. Other than that, we have no idea that there's anything happening. You know, that constant reassurance of this is happening, something is happening, because otherwise it could be a massive hoax for all we know, and for all, you know, these people in this radio station know as well. You know, they have no idea. You know, the fact that it's like a blizzard outside as well. It's like the Shining thing. It emphasizes this feeling of them being so isolated.
Totally isolated.
They're so cut off.
Yeah.
Ken, are you there, Ken?
Okay, we've got nothing on this
We've
Grant.
got to get some information on what is clearly happening.
Guys, this is 5 kilometers
More
from
than
here.
5 kilometers from the station itself. This is
Don't
what we
say
have.
a lot,
We
Grant.
have,
We need to get this confirmed somehow.
Something has happened at a doctor's office here in Pontypool involving a possible riot.
I can't get through the OPD.
Clearly something has
I hope
happened here in Pontypool.
Okay, we've lost Ken. Go to break. Go to
Can he
recap, Grant.
describe what he saw, or at least what he thinks he saw?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to know, like, what you think personally. Because you're a writer, and you do these live performances where you tell ghost stories.
Yeah.
And it's all in the language. It's all in the verbal. You know, and again, just for you as a kind of turning a zombie story into what is essentially like a play, a ghost story almost. I mean, does it work for you in that regard?
It really does. Like I find, like I say, those moments with Ken in particular, they're ingenious. Actually, there's some moments where he talks about what's actually happening and how it's going to scar him for the rest of his natural life. And his choices of language are so unbelievably creepy. When he's talking about the boy who doesn't have any hands anymore.
Oh my god, yeah.
And it's all in these weird, disjointed descriptions of what he can see.
Totally.
And as you say, all we've really got is facial expressions of somebody else to react to. I think it's quite ingenious. I think it's an incredibly bold film.
I think so.
In that regard. I mean, imagine making a film where you have next to no visual horror.
Yes.
But it seems to be really celebrated as a movie, and quite rightly, I think.
Definitely. It really embraces it. And I think it proves the power of language, doesn't it? And the power of storytelling through language, because on the face of it, there's nothing scary happening here, but there's something about our brains. Like something doesn't sit right from the beginning. Like I said at the beginning, when I first watched it, I was frustrated and felt kind of unsafe in what I was watching, because I didn't really know what I was watching. People talking over each other, people not really explaining what's happening. We don't really have a clear concept of who these people are, how long they've all worked together, even the basics. It feels like you're kind of lumped into this kind of unknown space or unknown world from the beginning.
It totally does. And the other thing is, there's quite a few shots of the clocks in the studio.
Time,
But really weirdly, what kept occurring to me was, I don't know what time is it. I don't know what time we're supposed to be in.
No, totally.
But it does keep cutting to the clocks.
Yes.
And I'm like, so actually, the film is telling us what time it is, but somehow still, because you're in that totally isolated space, it is very, very claustrophobic. It is very disorientating and dizzying, isn't it?
Yeah, it is totally. It is. Disorientating is the perfect word for it. And I think for me, as a lover of somebody, and I think we both have this idea of, like, you watch M.R. James, the old BBC M.R. James adaptations, or you watch a movie by David Lynch, or there's something scary about not knowing what the fuck you're looking at sometimes. It's the uncanny, isn't it? And I think this is one of the very few zombie movies that has that sense of the uncanny.
And it's what, again, coming back to that idea of the news photo without the caption.
Yes.
What exactly are we experiencing?
Yes.
Again, to come back to this idea of Ken being the source of horror.
Yes.
He starts talking about, I think some of the lines are, he's lying here in the dark, his body's broken to pieces, they're not stumps, they're pointing up at his sides, all these really weird images. And we understand what the words mean, we understand what the sentences mean, but there's something about the way it's presented as without that visual.
Yes.
That again, that's where the horror comes from in Pontypool. So in introducing Roland Barthes and that quote to the movie, that is sort of suggesting to us that that the director's interested in philosophy and linguistics, and in particular semiotics, which is the study of signs and symbols, as well as how meaning is created and understood and communicated. And one element of semiotics focuses on the idea of the signifier and the signified, and the two together make up a sign.
Right.
So, and a sign is basically a thing. So the signifier is the way in which we express a thing, either an object, an image, a concept, and that will be a word or a sound or an image. The signified is what it means to us. So, for example, if we take heart as an example, the word, sound, or image heart, that's the signifier.
Yeah.
The meaning or the idea of heart, the connotations it conjures, the other signifiers basically. So the organ, body, blood, but also in a different context, romance, love, affection.
Right.
Yeah. So the two things together make up a sign. Now in this, it's a really
interesting.
Yeah,
it's like the denotation connotation thing,
absolutely.
right? Kind of what it is on the face of it, and then what it means or what it represents in your brain.
Absolutely.
Or whatever.
And I sort of bring it up because they sort of reference back then he was interested in semiotics. It seems to be, the whole film seems to be undermining this idea of what we all agree are constants and what mean what we all agree in terms of meaning.
Yes.
Because towards the end of the film, obviously you get this sense of the word kill changing to kiss. Kill is kiss, kill is kiss. And that, I think, is a really horrifying concept. That suddenly the world that you know, you can't be sure of it. It's suddenly shaky, and all these things that you feel like we agree on as a society are sort of crumbling almost. And the way when the language starts to break down, and particularly with the girl who's performing Lawrence of Arabia, it is really traumatic.
It is.
And when
it's scary,
it is. And when Laura Land starts to, she's saying, "I just want to check if Mr. Mazzy is missing," and she keeps repeating that word. It's really traumatic because suddenly she can't express herself, she can't communicate meaning, and that. Yeah, it's presented as a really traumatic idea.
It's a big deal, isn't it, for us? That's so, even if we don't realise it, how much we rely on it, I think, of basic language being a thing. And and I guess so many zombie movies are about ultimately like the crumbling of society in some way, or civilization, and this is the crumbling of language. Language and the way it relates to whatever content or whatever emotion or tone is always important. I mean, we talked on the Patreon briefly about A Clockwork Orange, and I know we've talked about this, the idea of Alex's language, Nadsat, and how kind of lavish and free and extravagant it is, and how it kind of reflects the movie and his character and that kind of thing. And you get that through so much of fiction and literature and film and art, don't you? Kind of language representing the themes in some way. And it's exactly the same in this kind of like breakdown of language somehow creates this kind of horror.
And I think as well, Pontypool feels kind of prophetic in a way. Like, I can't believe it's 10 years old.
No, it doesn't feel dated. I keep thinking in my head that it's like within the last few years.
It seems to be making some really interesting points about now and about meaning and that kind of thing. Because I was thinking about it. Well, there were two things, but the first one is that in terms of like fake news and things like that, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So this film is about somehow an undermining of what we agree upon in terms of language in this film, but I think more widely. And so when towards the end Grant sort of realizes that the key is to change the meaning of things to mean something else, it does make me think about the way our sense of trauma and disbelief when we discover that something that somebody has said, in positions of power are completely wrong.
Yes.
And I think it goes a bit deeper than we've been lied to.
Yeah.
There's a deeper sense of betrayal because we understood the words, we understood the sentiment, and we believed it to be, in inverted commas, true and concrete. And suddenly the rug has been pulled completely from under us.
Yeah, totally.
And it does seem to be toying with that idea as a film, doesn't it?
I think so. Just that, the one thing that we can kind of rely on has been, like you say, pulled from under us. Definitely.
Instability of like a constant. And then the other thing I thought was really fascinating, and again, I couldn't quite believe it was 10 years ago because of how bang on this felt as a sentiment, when Grant starts talking about, I want to piss people off.
Yes.
because an agitated listener is paying attention.
Yeah.
And I thought that's really fascinating.
It is.
And I don't remember 10 years ago necessarily. I can't remember what the state of play was 10 years ago in terms of politics and things like that. But in terms of the amount of agitators we seem to have,
definitely,
who really do that, who really do piss people off and say this horrendous thing and that horrendous thing, and yet it doesn't seem to, or if anything, it means they receive more attention.
Totally.
Yeah,
totally. It's that I thought that too. It feels. I mean, it's 10 years ago. I suppose it's not a huge amount of time ago, but it feels very ahead of its time for 10 years ago. Even. Yeah. I mean, one of my questions was going to be, has this film dated in any way? And I personally don't think it has at all.
I don't think so. No, I was, as I said, I was alarmed.
Yes.
I don't know if I watched it 10 years ago. I think I did. I think it was about that amount of time, but I can't really believe it. It feels really fresh. It feels like it's still got a lot to say. And I was watching an interview with the director, and he was talking about how they'd used all this old radio equipment because I think it was just all they could get their hands on. But actually, that gives it a timelessness.
It does.
Somehow.
It does.
I don't know what I'm looking for in a radio studio. I don't know what does what.
But I did notice there's barely a single moment when they go, what's going on in the world? Let's look online. Let's look on the internet. I mean, it was only 2008. They still had the internet.
That's a good
point.
But
they're relying on this guy in a helicopter or whatever.
That didn't even occur to me, actually.
I think there's one moment when they say something about on the BBC website or something. But other than that, there's no mention of being able to look online or anything.
They're getting quite a lot of information through from sources other than the internet.
It's really interesting. And again, that I suppose that is one thing that you could never get away with now. If this movie was made in 2019, everyone would be going, well, why the fuck aren't they just looking online or on Twitter or something?
Twitter. Twitter would
What's Twitter
demolish this
saying?
film, wouldn't it? Yeah. But I'm sure there'd be a way to get around. There'll be a conceit, wouldn't there? We can't get any signal down here, or the Wi-Fi's broken or something.
Exactly. And I think that's true. You can kind of believe all that because, again, of that kind of sense of isolation that they built up. And actually, we should talk about the setting itself. Pontypool is a real little town, apparently, in Ontario, in Canada. And I feel like, and I know we're not probably the best authority to talk about this, two British blokes, but it feels like a very Canadian film in a lot of ways. And I feel like there is stuff that it's saying here about Canada, maybe about, I don't know, colonialism, about the British and their relationship with Canada, and the French and language and Canada's place, I suppose, in this Western world.
There's something about it being a bilingual nation, isn't it? There's something about and I spoke to my friend Jill the other day, who's from Toronto, and I was asking her some questions about this because, as you say, I mean, I'm not Canadian, so I don't know the history. It's not embedded in that way, but so I wanted to ask her a few questions, and I was asking her about that scene where Grant and Sydney talking French and about whether
I love that.
And it's really funny, isn't it? Because they're talking in this sort of GCSE level French. I love.
Reminds me of Flight of the Conchords, like boeuf,
pamplemousse, ananas, jus d'orange, boeuf.
Yeah, the bit where she says "s'il vous plaît," it feels really like a really unnecessary couple of words to use, but it's just in her vocabulary, so she uses it. But I was asking her about that and about whether it would be, whether actually people from Pontypool would speak French fluently. She said that there are areas in, I think, Northern Ontario where people are more likely to be bilingual, and she was talking about things like if you buy things from supermarkets at home, that's in both English and French and things like that.
Well, there you go.
And I think there is something interesting about that, in that that switch into French towards the end, where you've got this in inverted commas invading force, or certainly a military force, but actually it's not. It's probably domestic, isn't it? Well, it's domestic, isn't it? It's French-speaking Canadians, rather than somebody coming along and insisting upon a different language.
Totally,
maybe?
I would say so. Yeah, and it is. There's a kind of irony, I think, isn't there? Because you could have this happen in America or in Britain, and it's like, shit, if we can't use the English language, we're screwed because that's all we speak. Canada actually do, like you say, there is this idea of dual. There's this two languages.
Yeah.
So actually, Canada, more than any other English-speaking country in the Western world, could have more of a chance of surviving this because they could all switch to French if they knew it. But actually, maybe they don't. And it's that funny thing of like, both of them are like, "Can you speak French?"
I actually think as well that scene. If I had, it's the only criticism I probably have of the film. I would have liked to have seen that film without the subtitles.
Oh yeah, because I think we didn't comprehend what they were saying.
Because I think we get the sense of it, even when you're watching it. You really get what's happening. You really get that they're arguing about who's going to go and kill the doctor and all that kind of thing. But it's a really great scene, isn't it?
Have you seen the Peter Strickland film Barbarian Sound Studio by any chance? There's something about it reminded me, watching it again, of that. And do you remember how obviously that's so much a film about sound and about filmmaking and this kind of breakdown of language and how in the, I don't want to spoil it too much, but in the latter half it kind of abandons English and it becomes something else, and actually we don't get the subtitles. I don't know if you remember, but it basically becomes a kind of Italian giallo movie without the English in the second half, and it's that pure kind of disorientation that we're presented with as well. And again, there is something just really creepy about that, about not being able to comprehend.
For sure. But I think in that scene, and there's a few others where from other cues that are happening, visual cues, their body language, their facial expressions, you can pick up and piece that stuff together, and create meaning, even if you don't speak any French whatsoever. I think, but I just think it would be. I think it's a great comparison, actually. To Barbarian Sound Studio.
And you're right, I think, again, our brains, this is the thing about Pontypool that works so well and so cleverly, because we want to be able to comprehend, and our brains will try and comprehend. You can watch Shakespeare, and really, it's hard I find it very hard to comprehend Shakespeare reading it from a book. I really do. But when you watch it and you hear it, your brain puts it all together, I think.
It's all of the stuff together, isn't it?
Yeah,
exactly.
It is.
And so when, I think, as the film goes on, there is an argument to suggest that there's a moment in that film where it could possibly then just be Grant's delusion all the way through.
Right, interesting.
Do you know the bit where he basically wants to leave the studio, and he seems like he seems like something's mounting in him.
That's right.
Do you know what
I mean?
And he
snaps,
doesn't he? And he points at Sydney, and it's a really dramatic, strange moment.
It's so weird.
And then from that point, everything seems a little bit murky in terms of the meaning of it. And again, I think some of the trauma of the film is watching it, and some of the fear that's induced is that sense of, I understand these words.
Yes.
I get what each of the words mean. I understand the sort of vague flow of what you're saying, but actually I can't quite grasp what the meaning is.
No.
And it's uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable. It is frustrating in a lot of ways. And I love the idea that, yes, this zombie infection is spreading through language. So therefore, don't just cut out all these words. And we don't know what words to cut out as well.
That's it.
And it says something like, just terms of endearment.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting because it's set on Valentine's Day. So do you think that's just because that day there were a lot of terms of endearment being used, and maybe that's why?
Well, you see, I've read a few. There's so much out there about Pontypool on the internet. And if you start reading stuff about it, I think. I mean, I've read so many articles in the last few weeks about it, and there, some are fantastic and some are absolutely fascinating. Yeah, and some I think just
drivel.
Basically. But I've read a couple of theories that his initial monologue about the cat is the trigger, and it's interesting that the cat is called Honey.
Yes.
And later in the film, the word honey keeps coming back as this term of endearment, and there is this suggestion that his observation about coincidence and things like that are the trigger. So that actually, and what happens when just before Laurel Ann and a few moments before Laurel Ann is infected,
Yes.
she replays Mazzie's.
That's right. They play it as like an emergency broadcast.
Yeah. And I actually think that the very opening scene of the film where you get that monologue, and then when you're suddenly in his car, I think that's really disorientating as well.
Very.
Because when he's listening to himself.
Yes.
But when was that recorded?
When was that recorded? Why was he saying that? It's weird.
It's very bizarre.
It's weird.
And it immediately sets it up as this very important thing. Yeah.
It is a fascinating monologue. Obviously, Mrs. French as well.
Mrs. French.
The French language as well. It's like all of these little words
and
are
the
hidden
French
within that
and the
monologue.
French for cat is chat, which is chat. I don't know if that's relevant.
My God!
I don't know if I have no idea if it's relevant in a film that invites you to pick out the coincidences. I'm going to go with that. It might not be.
No, of course it is.
Yeah.
I bet that's intended.
I wondered whether it's chat, and do other people use the word chat apart from people in Britain? I don't know. Maybe they do.
Good point. I don't know. But that's fascinating.
Yeah, there you go.
That's fascinating.
That's my little spot.
That's really interesting. God.
There's lots about the power of language, isn't there? And there's that scene where after Ken Loney dies,
yes.
I'm obsessed with Ken Loney in this film. I really am, but I genuinely think to a certain extent he's the centre of this film.
Yeah.
But after he dies, and Sydney says she's crying, and Grant sort of tries to console her, and she says, "Oh no, he was a paedophile." And I tell you what I find really fascinating is that as soon as she utters that word, she immediately takes it back.
Yes.
She says, "Oh, actually, no, he's not a paedophile. We just wouldn't let our kids near him." Right. But what I think is really fascinating is how powerful that word is.
Yeah.
Because you can't unlink that with the character of Ken anymore.
That's so true.
And again, I think it's a really interesting comment, obviously on that word specifically, but the power of language in general.
That kind of accusation culture too.
Yeah.
That's so true.
You can't divorce that from your perspective of Ken anymore, even though immediately she says, actually, no, that's not what I meant.
But it's like she knows herself the power of that word.
Yeah.
And sort of says, oh, I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
God, that's really interesting as well. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. It's. I think it's.
It's so rich, this film.
And another thing about Ken Loney, while I'm on the topic,
Yeah.
there's something interesting going on with his with the helicopter device.
And the fact that it's not
a helicopter, but we believe it is because firstly he tells us it is, and secondly, we understand what that sound is.
Yes,
we understand the rotors.
Yes,
combined with the word sunshine chopper.
Yes,
means that he's in a helicopter.
Yeah.
And I think it's might be a bit of a dead end point to make, but I think that again there are these moments in that film that keep underlining this idea of meaning and our relationship to meaning, and how if you undercut that, everything becomes meaningless. Everything becomes chaos.
Nothing means anything. Yeah, it's so true. You could that building. They could walk out and be in the middle of a ocean or something. Like, you feel like there could be no meaning to anything, or nothing, almost nothing outside of those walls or something as well.
And Sydney makes this point about how somehow that the sunshine chopper is reassuring to the people of Pontypool. They like that he's up there in the chopper, when in actual fact it's his car on the hillside. But then the other thing that I noticed is really towards the end of the film, one of the sort of the things that signals that it's really descending into an apocalyptic zombie situation is the sound of a chopper.
Choppers,
and
it's the sign of chaos.
It's
as
a
well.
sign of So suddenly it doesn't mean this comfortable, happy, reassuring source of information, but it's this threat all of a sudden.
Oh, they flip the meaning of it. Like they flip the meaning of words. It's so clever.
It's fascinating.
I mean, I was thinking of it as some sort of comment on maybe religion or the government as well when she said that, when she was like, look, it's not real, but people like to believe that he's up there looking over us, and people rely on it, and people want to believe that. Let them believe it, kind of thing as well.
Great.
And I kind of thought that either as some sort of godly type presence, or as some sort of politician maybe, or something, and this person that's actually not that, and he's actually a paedophile, but we won't, but people like to believe that he's up there looking after us.
It's like a movie Rorschach test, isn't it? Like where you can but I do think that's part of it, actually. And again, to go back to Roland Barthes, he wrote that essay, didn't he, Death of the Author, where he essentially says I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something about he mentions a tissue of quotations and how I think the basis of it is that your experience of reading a sentence is completely different to my experience of reading a sentence because our life experiences are different. So what we bring to a sentence, what we bring to each word is slightly different. And again, I think it's very knowing that film. I think it's essentially saying you're able to take what you want from this.
Yes.
Totally.
I think that's so true, and that's obviously part of it massively, I think, because the film is so opaque and it is so minimalist in what they show you and what they give you.
Yeah.
And I think the point of it is our struggle to comprehend and our natural inclination to want to piece things together and understand
and be understood, right?
And be understood. That I think that is exactly what it's doing. I think it's deliberately giving you this like hard to decipher, opaque like puzzle box and going, you make of this what you will, kind of thing.
So here we go, folks. Kill is kiss. Kill is definitely kiss. Now sample is staple, sweetheart.
Okay, too specific, Grant.
Listen to me, folks. Everything is something else, okay? If you are saying happy, it means sad. Happy means... No, that's the opposite. It can't be that. Okay, it can't be that. Happy is handy. Happy's handy. Move things around. People just move them around.
So what do we think of the ending? And there's this glimmer of hope almost when the kill is kiss moment happens.
Yeah.
It's like they've beaten it. They've beaten the infection. And then he's like, right, quick, we've got to get on the air and tell them how to do it. And it's his like kind of attempt then to kind of go, like we said, we talked about already, stop understanding things. Or then they kind of they say a series of words unrelated to one another in the hope that it will break down understanding or break down language in order to save humanity. But at the end of the day, is that an impossible thing? Like, would that ever work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, they play a sort of game of dissociation, don't they? Where they're sort of, it's what, I'm sorry, I haven't a clue, that kind of game where they're playing a game where you've got to pick an unrelated word from the last.
They do one thing, don't they? I can't remember what it is, alive and dead or something, and they're like, no, you can't do that because that's opposite.
It's opposite, And when I think Sydney says to him, no, don't say that because you've just told people to stop understanding, and if you do that, it defeats the purpose. I think it's a really bewildering, confusing ending.
For so many reasons.
For so many reasons, but then topped off with that fantastic, slightly hopeful message of it's not the end of the world, it's just the end of the day. And I don't know what we were saying earlier about whether it's all right to have long moments of long moments that aren't clear and that are confusing and that are densely packed with loads of ideas, and then suddenly you get these really great moments of almost like rhetoric. It's almost like political rhetoric towards the end.
It's so true, isn't it? It's so true. And you kind of there's this weird feeling of optimism, even though know that they're possibly about to be killed there at that moment, aren't they? Or bombed or something. It feels like something's about to happen there.
In French, the military, or certainly whoever's in the helicopter, is saying the man who is speaking is infected. I think is what he says. So again, are we in his delusion?
Yeah, it's so true.
At this point, are we in are we in his head?
And also, it's just that's that endless cycle of him talking nonsense in order to cure people has made maybe people think that he's infected because he's talking nonsense.
Totally.
So it's like
from his very first monologue, I think that it almost feels, like I said, poetic, but it feels complicated. He's not using straightforward language. He's not doing his job as a morning DJ in a local station, is he?
No, he's not.
He's sort of rhapsodizing and bringing like art to it somehow.
Yeah, he is, and he talks quickly, and some of the intonations of the words and the throwaway parts of the sentence shouldn't be throwaway. When he sort of goes Pontyfrack and Pontypool, and it's like, hang on, what did you just say? He explains something but really too quickly to comprehend, and it is it's.
Did you find? I was surprised on a second viewing how. It really seems to whip along. It's only 90 minutes, so it's not a long film as such. But I never felt, even though the only bit of proper traditional visual horror we get is when Laurel Ann
is smashing her head
against the glass.
That's basically it, isn't it?
Yeah,
apart from when all the conversation, this kind of break in, but you don't really see them.
Don't see it.
Yeah.
No, and you see the hand. There's a few little jumps and things like that, but it's mostly. It's very wordy script, and I don't know. I was quite surprised about that. It felt very well paced.
Yeah, definitely. They're all. It's fascinating, and I feel like we could go down a wormhole for 10 hours about this. So we'll have to wrap it up soon. But I also found the character of Sydney fascinating at the beginning, and it is frustrating the way she keeps talking over him. She's restricting him. He's trying to say what he wants to say, and she keeps stopping him.
Yeah.
He keeps trying to go off on one, and she's like, "Stop that."
Yeah.
Blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Grant, no, don't do this. Don't do this. And it feels like she's deliberately kind of restricting his language in the first half. As that kind of producer presenter relationship as well. She's censoring him or something as well.
Well, what did you make of them? The sort of romantic element.
Yeah, I mean. Again, this whole film is so surreal and so odd that it didn't... I kind of believed it.
I think I sort of did. I don't know. Again, second time I watched it, I think I was a tad disappointed that it went down
that it
that
needed
way.
to go that way.
Then I'm starting to really come out of this idea that we're in his head. And if we are, this is just like it's just like a daydream, isn't it? It's just him sort of like being the ultimate hero who,
totally.
And that sort of slightly cheesy line of "kill me."
Yes, kill me. It's brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. It's really interesting, and and again, this idea of terms of endearment being dangerous, and yet they've turned the word "kill" into a terms of into kiss.
Yeah,
and it saved them. So nothing makes any sense in this world.
So
nothing,
complex. Yeah,
it's crazy.
And we haven't.
We haven't got to the post-credit sequence, have we?
My goodness.
So
that is so confusing.
I mean. Again, I almost feel like this post-credit sequence isn't meant to be understood. Almost, I just kind of thought, okay,
so
fine.
It's him in a sort of strange bar where there's snow in the background. Is it going up in the air rather than down? I don't know.
I can't.
Maybe it's not. Maybe I've just imagined it.
It kind of looks like something out of like Sin City or a film noir,
exactly
or something,
what I thought,
doesn't it? Yeah,
exactly what I wrote down. That it was noiry.
Yeah,
and it's this weird nonsensical dialogue, and then suddenly he tells it a shush, and it cuts to the end credit, the fan.
Yeah,
and I think it does, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, it does.
And what does it mean?
What does it mean?
Apparently, I read as well that was before the credits originally. So it was at the very last scene of the film, but apparently audiences didn't quite understand it, and so they put it at the end as a kicker. But what does it mean? Who knows?
What does it mean? I think it emphasizes the idea that it's in his head, maybe, or it's some sort of fantasy, or it could be that they're dead. That's the other thing I thought, is that they are now dead and they're somewhere else or whatever. I don't know.
Again, it's one of those things, isn't it, where you go, are we invited to understand it, or are we actually invited specifically to not worry about understanding it and just enjoy it as a weird short
totally
at the end?
I do think, but the way it's filmed and the way he looks and the way she is with him, it does feel like his fantasy or something in some way. That end scene,
definitely
more
does.
than anything else, and it fits with the idea that maybe this film is in his head. I think to that extent,
Definitely.
that ending, definitely.
Maybe the whole thing, maybe from the point at which the woman bangs on the glass, maybe because what is she saying to him? Do you know?
No, I don't know.
I couldn't figure it out. She's saying the word over and over again. Maybe he gets infected at that point, and we're literally seeing it from inside his head with all the sort of dissolution of language and meaning. Yeah. Maybe. There we go. We've solved it.
We've solved it. We've solved Pontypool. It's given me a headache. Oh my Christ. It's such a good film. Absolutely amazing. I mean, after all that, would you recommend it to people?
Absolutely. I think it's a really exceptional film.
There's no other, especially there's no other zombie film in which you can have the kind of conversation that we've just had about it. I think.
I don't even think we've gone through the majority of what is the plot, because you just get so tied up in
you do
these other things.
Yeah,
we haven't even mentioned Dr. Martinez.
When he enters through the window,
he comes backwards through the window.
Yes, absolutely insane. Yeah. What a brilliant movie.
Yeah,
I'm ready to watch it again already. I love it. All right, well, let's move on because we've got another whole film to talk about. Let's get on to The Girl with All the Gifts.
Once upon a time, there was a woman. The most beautiful and amazing woman in all the world.
No! You just touched her. Watch.
No, please, don't do that. They're only children. Stop it! One day, she was attacked by a monster. But then a girl came running up and killed it. And the woman said, "Melanie! You are my special girl, and I'll never let you go."
So the story is Melanie is a school pupil and a prisoner at a maximum security military facility somewhere in England. She and her classmates are apparently the subjects of a series of mental and physical experiments at the hands of Dr. Caroline Caldwell, who's played by Glenn Close, Sergeant Eddie Parks, Paddy Considine, and the more sympathetic Helen Justineau, Gemma Arterton. Each day, Melanie and her classmates are secured and wheeled to the classroom by armed guards where they demonstrate their remarkable skills and apparently superhuman intelligence, as well as their so-called gifts. We learn that the children crave human flesh and when exposed to it fall into violent animalistic rages. Miss Justineau has formed a strong attachment to Melanie, and when the girl is taken to Dr. Caldwell's lab to be dissected, the teacher intervenes. It's only then that we learn what's happening in the outside world. A fungal disease has taken hold of the population, turning them into flesh-eating creatures called hungries. Dr. Caldwell's aim is to use Melanie's brain and spinal column to engineer a vaccine for the disease. When the horde of hungries descend upon the facility, Melanie, Miss Justineau, Dr. Caldwell, Sergeant Parks and two of his soldiers escape and head to London and to the supposed safety of the Beacon headquarters. Along the way, Melanie learns the truth about her identity, and the adults must learn to trust and accept her as a fellow human if any of them are to survive.
Oh, what a beautiful synopsis. What do you think? So
okay?
good.
I wrote it and then just read it. I could have just
I love it. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. Because this is quite, compared to Pontypool, this is quite a dense story. Like, there's a lot going on, actually, plot-wise in this, isn't there?
It's very story-heavy. And actually, I think it's some really lovely storytelling in it.
It is. And it really it is, like you say, it's very story-heavy. It goes a long way. From the beginning of this film to the end, a lot happens, right? A lot changes. Everything changes, it feels like. So, first of all, what do you think of this movie? Generally, are you a fan?
Again, I think it's a great film. I really enjoyed it. I think it takes the zombie movie somewhere else.
Somewhere new.
It pushes us in a different direction. I think the characters are really interesting, engaging.
Yeah, they are.
There's a modernness to it that I really like. It's obviously set in the near future, and it's great, and great performances all around as well. I think the cast, it feels like an ensemble cast after the first sort of 10, 15 minutes or so. It feels like
you're right. Yeah.
It's an ensemble piece, and I think it works brilliantly. I think they become this sort of dysfunctional family as time goes on, and I think it's great.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's great. I think it's again, there are so many zombie movies that are just zombie movies that are just generic, and they can still be really fun. But what's really interesting about this is that it kind of takes it one step further, and it's like, okay, we all know what the zombie movie is now. What next? Like, what happens next? Where do we go from here? Kind of thing. And this is similarly. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, there's not a huge amount of similarities to this and Pontypool, but I think there is that idea, like you talked about at the end of Pontypool. It's not just a new world; it's a new day. This idea that, like, maybe it's time for a change. Maybe it's time to see a change. Maybe humanity's, maybe we're done. Maybe we're done.
That's it. Again, this film has its own, it's not the end of the world, it's just the end of the day line, where she says, I can't remember exactly, it's not the end, it's just not yours anymore.
It's just not yours anymore.
And it's very final, but at the same time, it's not that bleak. It's not that bleak sort of apocalyptic, everyth's over message. It's something else is going to happen now. There's going to be a new dawn of sorts.
Exactly.
But it's not what's gone before. So
totally.
That seems to be, and it definitely shares out with Pontypool. I also think there's again this idea of the reluctant zombie.
Yes.
Which in Melanie as a character, this idea she doesn't really want to. Well, she certainly doesn't want to attack and hurt people, and feels tremendous guilt when she does.
Yeah,
and actually opts as the film goes on to eat animals rather than people. A few other echoes. You've got the station in Pontypool is called the Beacon.
Yes,
I think.
Oh,
is
yeah,
that right?
Of course.
Is that what there's certainly a reference to the Beacon.
Yes, true.
And in Go With All the Gifts, that's the HQ, isn't it? They're heading towards the Beacon. There's this sort of Brave New World, as we said, feeling about it.
Definitely.
And there's some sort of satire creeping about there, isn't it? I wasn't entirely clear what.
And I think there's a language element to it as well. I think look at the way that she communicates with the other zombie children.
So interesting.
That's an interesting scene. It kind of reminded me a little bit as well of the opening of 2001. This idea of like it's a new dawn of man, a new age beginning. This idea of like evolution happening before our very eyes, kind of thing. That's what it reminded me of a little bit. I think it's fascinating. And actually, going back slightly to what we talked about at the beginning with, our preferences, the kind of scary zombie movies that kind of give you the breakout, introduce the mythology and that kind of thing. I think, the more I've talked about all these zombie movies, the more I've kind of realised they do kind of fall into these categories, and you get the kind of more horror based beginning of the infection. Then you get the Dawn of the Dead model, which are more action, I suppose. They're more like we're in the midst of a zombie apocalypse and it's all about killing zombies and surviving. And then you get the Day of the Dead model, which is much more the world has ended and what's next kind of thing. And I think, there are elements of this that, I talk about it like it's something new, but even George Romero in Day of the Dead introduced this idea of Bub, the evolved zombie, starting to learn, starting to live like a human. And it's kind of, he kind of continues that a bit with Land of the Dead. But, it's that idea continued in that it's not, that's it. The world has ended for humans now. It's time for zombies to take over, and this is what happens to them, kind of thing.
I think it's an area that this film is quite successful because I said earlier about how there are lots of zombie films where you don't really have this charismatic, in inverted commas, villain or threat.
Yes.
And actually in this, Melanie occupies this really curious space where she's both the threat and absolutely the hero.
Yes.
And I think there's an awful lot of complexity in the character, even in the sort of subtleties of her actions. So when really early in the film you find out that she's given worms to eat, that's her diet.
Yes,
I was watching that scene really carefully, and she doesn't dive into it the way you would expect a frenzied zombie to do it. She eats it kind of like a hungry kid would eat any meal, or like a greedy kid would eat a McDonald's or something. I don't know, but she eats it with relish. There's not a lot of violence in it.
You're right.
And I actually think that it's very skillfully directed and very skillfully performed. To give us this really layered threat.
Definitely. And I think we're supposed to from the start, aren't we? Like, I think it very cleverly teases what the situation here is, what this world is. We see these kids chained up and restricted in these classrooms. And first of all, you think, what is this? Is it because we're in some sort of dystopia? Is it, what's happening? Are the adults the bad guys? Are there zombies outside? What's happening? Then of course you learn that they are the zombies. But you get drip fed these details about Melanie. She starts off as this very sympathetic character, this like abused child essentially, but then you discover she's a monster, quote unquote, and but what does that mean? And you're right, I think there's an extra layer of complexity because she's not just this half human, half zombie thing. She's also a child, and because of that affects her behavior, and she acts more on maybe emotion, like the way that she the way she feels about Gemma Arterton's character is not just because of the zombie thing, it's because of she's a child, and there's a child parent, child teacher type relationship as well.
I have to say that my favourite moments in this film, my favourite scenes are within the facility. So when I first watched it, I watched it when we were on tour with our show last year in a hotel in Doncaster or somewhere, I can't remember. And when they left the facility, when they leave, so obviously what happens is you see these classroom scenes, which are these strange, very normal classroom scenes, except that the lessons seem to be about testing their clairvoyance and things like that.
Yes.
Mixed with Greek myth and stuff and creative writing.
Yeah.
And then quite quickly, I think probably about 20 minutes into the film?
Yeah, very quickly.
We leave the compound, and actually, I think the most interesting bits are in that classroom
that world
setting.
Yeah, you want it more like Pontypool, where you don't see the outside.
I kind of do.
Yeah,
I mean, I do like a lot of what goes on to happen in that film. I really do. But I think, there's something about that isolation. There's something about the real intense study of the characters in those moments where that it felt really original.
I agree with you. I like the film and I like where it goes, but I think there's a whole film that you could be made there about that first third, about what really is going on with these kids getting taken away in the night. What's Glenn Close really doing to them?
Glenn Close's character is
brilliant,
fantastic.
Because like you said, in the same way that we don't know whether Melanie is the hero or villain, I think it's the same with Glenn Close's character. There's this idea that what she's doing is to save humanity, really.
Absolutely.
But because we're so attached and so aligned with this child who she wants to kill and dissect and cut her brain open, she's kind of presented as this villain character. Is she really a villain? I don't know.
Again, I think it's dealt with really in a really interesting way, because she's not really horrible. She's cold. She's frosty. She's very.
But she's not malicious or sadistic.
No, she doesn't seem to be, and she seems actually to have something approaching fondness for
definitely,
Melanie, giving her these riddles and things, which I actually, when that happened, I was like, oh, this is actually quite a sweet moment. You realise obviously her intentions are not
everything she's doing is a test in some way.
It is a test,
an experiment.
But it did feel somehow like a stern authority figure who actually you grow to warm as the film goes on. Warm towards as the film goes on.
I agree.
But I think she's a fascinating character, and again, as you say, she does raise this question of what is Melanie? What? Because she keeps using this expression that she presents as a child.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But then that's really fascinating, because then you go, well, what does that mean? She talks like a child. She seems to think like a child.
Yeah, it's like the signifier and the signified again, isn't it?
It's what we take to understand. We understand what a child is when we see one.
Yeah.
And yet Glenn Close is saying no, but actually, really, she's not, because of this fungal
that's wrapped around disease. Her brain when she cuts it open. It's really interesting, because again, and they do all grow to trust her, don't they? Basically, by the second half of the movie, they're like, yeah, we'll let her out and she'll do her thing, kind of thing. And she's like, she's hungry, we'll go let her out and she can go find something to eat, kind of thing. And that relationship kind of does develop, but it is really interesting. You don't quite know how far to trust her the whole way, and of course she does basically betray them at the end in some ways, if you even can call it a betrayal. I don't know.
It is, she does. I mean, more or less, or at least she takes back control, doesn't she? There is that really great scene towards the end where she's talking to Glenn Close's character, Dr. Caldwell.
Yeah.
And Dr. Caldwell's trying to convince her that actually, if you let me dissect you, if you let me, you won't feel a thing, blah blah blah. But you'll save Miss Justineau, you'll save Sergeant Parks, etc. And then what happens is that Melanie is on the verge of saying, yeah, cool, I'll let you do that. But then there's that philosophical question of, are we people? Do you acknowledge us as people? And she says yes. And she says, well, why shouldn't we be the ones to survive then?
That's it. The whole film feels like the journey of Glenn Close realising she is a person, actually. She is a conscious being with feelings and emotions,
and it's again in a different film, in the hands of a different writer and a different director. That scene would probably be, and then Melanie jumps on her and eats her. But you don't get that. You get something. I don't know whether it's as dramatic, but it's certainly more subtle. And actually, she just leaves the two, and she's just like, right, well, I'm off to do this sort of final mission.
Destroy the world, basically.
But it seems to, again, it's a film. It talks about Schrodinger's cat, and it seems there's that very famous thought experiment in ethics, isn't there, where it's about if there's like a train coming down the tracks and there's a switch, if you leave the switch where it is, it will kill a dozen people or
Right.
something, and if you click the switch, it will just kill one person or something like that. It's along those lines where you've got to make I think it's like one child or something.
Yes.
It's that complicated, difficult question, and it's really fascinating watching that film again because I was like, principally, obviously, I wouldn't be wouldn't want to be the person to kill that one child, even if it would save humanity.
Yeah,
but you sort of go, Dr. Caldwell's point of view is sort of
it's valid. Whether you agree with it or not, I think it's valid, isn't it? You could save the entire world by killing this little girl.
Yeah. And it's a horrendous thought. It's a horrendous thought, but again, I think it's complex and interesting.
It is really complex and interesting, and what's really brilliant is that because we kind of come to be aligned with Melanie's point of view, it in some ways it's presented as a monstrous thing because we are come to realise that Melanie is alive, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And so are all of these other children, this whole new generation of Hungries or whatever they call them.
Yeah.
And so therefore what she's essentially saying is she's committing a different kind of genocide by wiping out these children in the same way that Melanie does, when she lights up the BT tower.
Yeah. I had some questions about that as well. I don't know if I've misunderstood something there, but so the Hungries that we see surrounding the compound at the beginning, and the ones that are the threat most of the way through the film.
Yeah, the kind of first generation Hungries.
So they have been infected by the spores, right? By the fungus, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. Or whoever like patient zero is.
Whoever patient zero is,
yeah.
But then, Melanie's, Melanie and her classmates and the kids that we meet later on as in the sort of tribe of children, they are the children of first generation Hungries, right?
Exactly. So I guess women who were infected while pregnant is the idea, isn't it? And then these babies ate their way out of their mothers.
That's right. That's what they say. But then if she lights this bonfire, and all these spores are released, which they are, aren't you going to have
millions of the
first generation ones, which Melanie seems to accept are a threat because she kills Sergeant Parks for becoming one?
I think it's ultimately a it's you or me kind of thing with the humans, and she decides to basically wipe the slate clean. So by turning everyone into Hungries, even those first generation Hungries, yes, they are just these like monsters. They are no threat to her. She can just walk past them and they just stand there still.
That's really interesting.
So essentially the whole world will be filled with either these like non-conscious Hungries or this new generation who are like her. So there'll be no threat of humanity wiping her out anymore, I guess, by doing that. So she's not really creating a new world of people like her, but she's basically ridding the world of the rest of humanity,
except for
so that then
Gemma Arterton.
Eventually in time, of Gemma Arterton. I wonder if eventually she envisions Gemma Arterton having a baby.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because her fate is really fascinating, and I think she's a very interesting character in lots of ways because you start off with this very I'm not even sure if it's maternal, certainly I don't know, it almost feels more like a big sister relationship. To me it does. The way she's affectionate towards Melanie, and then something I noticed which I thought was really interesting was that when Melanie attacks the soldiers and kills them for hitting Miss Justineau with the butt of the rifle in the sort of chaos scene when they're leaving the compound, Melanie seems to have a ton of remorse for this. She seems to feel really bad and really guilty about it. Miss Justineau really seems to shrug it off.
Yes.
And actually, pedant that I am, I really watched that scene.
Yeah.
And they weren't about to kill her. They weren't about to kill Miss Justineau. They'd hit her.
Yes.
But they weren't about to kill her, so her life at that moment wasn't in danger. But she sort of presents that to Melanie as, "Oh, well, you saved my life."
Right. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that she's quite able to shrug that off. And and then of course later at the very end where she wakes up with a tear running down her face, and I have questions about what is her feeling about her situation now.
Well, it seems to me like essentially they've been switched, right? So she's now in the cells, she's the prisoner. the zombies and the humans have switched places, and she's locked in this cell with this picture of this cat to look at that she sticks on her. And she's now living in this like school life in the same way that Melanie was, I guess. I'm assuming she's sad. I'm assuming that tear is she's trapped like a prisoner.
But she's not reluctant to teach them. It seems that's what I think is complicated. You get that scene where it seems like she's woken up and she's devastated, but then immediately she seems quite enthusiastically to want to teach the kids.
Yeah, you're right, and it's so interesting. It is nuanced, and I guess maybe there's that element of like, I still love these kids, you know, and I'm still going to help them, but I'm my species is fucked kind of thing. Yeah. It's interesting. Melanie's original plan, wasn't it, was to lock her in with Paddy so that there'd be the two of them together at least, you know.
Right. I didn't even pick up on that.
She was like, why did you leave, you know, when he died? Because she wanted her to have a companion in there.
That's right.
And whether or not she wanted them to reproduce or something, I don't know, whether there was that
possibly
thought.
Feels that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which is kind of sinister.
It is sinister. Or maybe it's simply that child thing of, I like you and I wanted to keep you around, in the same way that she did with the other character of Kieran, who she liked, and these other characters that she just kind of had a bond with, I suppose. But it's interesting. There is a lot going on.
I do love that as they start to progress through. So obviously when they escape the compound and they start to move towards London, they start to become this dysfunctional family.
Yes,
right?
they do. Right,
where you get Sergeant Parks as the dad.
Yeah,
Glenn Close, the mum, maybe,
kind
or
of.
the grandmother, or certainly the matriarch.
Definitely the matriarch. Exactly. Yeah.
And you know, Kieran as the brother.
Yep.
And it's quite nice, and you even get that sort of where do babies come from conversation. Yes. And I think it's really quite smart how it turns into this sort of twisted domestic road movie.
Totally. It's so true. And again, it's a weird, you know, that has happened with zombie things we've talked about so far. The Walking Dead has an element of that.
Yeah.
So does Zombieland even. You know, this kind of dysfunctional family forms on the road. All of that is interesting. I mean, what do you think of this? You know, stripping away all the stuff we've talked about as a zombie film, as a horror film. I mean, what do you think of these zombies? You know, every zombie has its own kind of law in some way, or rules, and these ones are like kind of, they just sort of stand there like mannequins until they're woken up and that kind of thing. How do you think all that works in terms of the tension and drama?
I think it is a slight flaw possibly of the film. You get two scenes, I think, in that film that are quite similar, where they're walking through the statuesque zombie figures, the Hungries. And somehow even the first one, there's not a lot of tension. I don't quite know why. I didn't feel tense as they were walking through them.
I agree.
The moment, I think, when it becomes powerful and scary is where you see that zombie pushing the pram.
Yes, that's creepy.
Really creepy. And then you get this very horrendous but kind of satisfying in a horror way reveal that it's a rat sort of that has devoured a baby, and it's a really horrible, arresting, powerful image.
The two creepiest moments in the films involve rats to me, and that's one, and the other one is the little girl holding the rat out in the shop, which is snack. Like, what's she doing?
As a lure to Kieran's character. But I think, and then we sort of get that motif repeated when Melanie walks through the Hungries, and I don't know that there's something. The film seems to at times have no venom, so to speak.
I agree. I think it's not interested in being a horror film. This film. I do think that. I think it's got other ideas. I think, doesn't it? I think yes, you're right. I think that scene where they walk through the Hungries could be a really tense, scary moment, and in the hands of some other directors, that really could have been played out, and it could have been, who knows, handheld. Yeah. It could have been darker. It could have been whatever. But it's kind of starkly lit, bright daylight. They're often quite wide shots. And it's just people wandering. And when they do wake up, they kind of shoot them and carry on. And you're right, there's almost deliberately so no interest in trying to make it tense or scary
and
something.
the soundtrack, which is by, is it Cristobal Tapia de Villa? Is that right?
It's a weird soundtrack.
I think it's beautiful. I think it's one of my favourite horror soundtracks of the last 10 years. I have it on when I'm working now. I write to it. It's really amazing. that sort of robot choral thing.
Yes.
But again, I think if you had a slightly different instrumentation at that point, strings or something boomier, it would alter that moment, and it would tell us as an audience that we need to feel tense right now.
And I think it in itself is interesting though, because if it's not going for that, maybe because we're so aligned with Melanie, I think maybe the point is this is not a scary end of humanity film. This is a dawn of a new world film, you know?
Yeah.
And I do wonder if there's, you know, even the way that London looks now, and the fact that it is, yes, it is this post-apocalyptic London, and it is eerie in some ways, but it's not eerie in the way that 28 Days Later London is portrayed. All of the lush green and it's kind of beautiful in some ways.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there is an element of it where I think, you're doing something different deliberately here. You're maybe not trying, because I would say the most disturbing moments are the beginning, the first third, and that's when Melanie is a prisoner, and that's when Melanie is at her most scared or something, and then as she goes free, and maybe that's why for us maybe it's a little bit less satisfying, I think that tension is kind of released a bit or something in that second half.
The horror of I feel like the Hungries in this film, even the way they run, it's like it's like me doing a park run. They're sort of not they're not like Danny Boyle frantic must sprint all the time zombies. They seem to be just sort of like running, but not, you know, we're not come on, let's take our time a bit. We don't want to get we don't want to get out of breath, but so I don't find it particularly scary. But what I did find scary on the first viewing was the way the kid in the first few scenes, I don't even know, I'm sure the character has a name, but I don't think he's given a name to us. When Sergeant Parks rubs the blocker gel off his arm and the kid suddenly starts to turn and this sort of the snapping of the jaw, and that I found pretty scary and pretty unnerving and uncanny.
It is, you're right.
But the zombies themselves, apart from that zombie with the pram,
I find the kids in the shop quite scary when Kieran dies, and I think it's more the build-up of it and the kind of the thought behind it, the setting a trap and stuff.
It's very calculating.
And when there's the pack of them that kind of jump, and that feels more like some sort of animal attack movie. I feel like I'm watching Jurassic Park. You know, I feel like he's going to go clever girl or something at that moment, you know. And it is interesting that, you know, and it could border on being a bit laughable at times, like when Melanie kind of has a growl off against the zombie kids.
It's
the
one scene in the whole thing that I don't really like. It
goes on a bit too long for me.
It does. It moves into, I don't know. Apart from the bit where she beats the zombie kid to death with a baseball bat. Apart from that, it feels a bit like a sort of BBC thing that I used to watch. You know, that I'd watched when I was a kid. That sort of.
You're right.
Like I say, apart from the bit where she beats somebody to death with a baseball bat, but yeah, it doesn't quite work for me. That scene. I don't know. I don't quite believe it. As you say, it goes on too long.
It does go on too long. Like I say, it brought to mind things like 2001 for me, and this idea of like these animal-like creatures or Neanderthal man or the dawn of some new species occurring in front of us. But
there's a great moment of comedy just after it though, where Melanie says to Sergeant Parks, "Pretend like you're frightened of me," and he says, "Pretend." Yeah, and it's really funny.
Sergeant Parks. I mean, Paddy Considine is always great, isn't he?
Yeah, he's really good. And again, you almost feel. I think it's really hard not to draw parallels with 28 Days Later with this, because the London thing, if nothing else. Yeah. But I think I don't know, because we've seen Christopher Eccleston in 28 Days Later, something about the get-up, something about the northern.
You're right.
As
you're
well.
right. You're right. They're similar.
And I was, when I first watched that, I was worried that he was going to go down a much sort of darker path. But actually, you end up. Really liking
he goes in the opposite path in a way, doesn't he? You
forgive him for calling them abortions all the way through, and her and kind of taking that on as a
I like that actually, that bit when she walks into a house for the first time and is kind of playing with the stuff in the house and
crunching at cornflakes. I kept spotting all these brands actually watching. I was like,
everywhere.
Specsavers.
Everywhere. Next. I felt like there were about 8 Next stores as well. I kind of like that about it as well, the kind of British high street look everywhere they go.
It did feel like that. It felt very British in a way that you don't see a lot. In 28 Days Later, obviously, it's London. It's iconic
Very
London.
different way to walking past the London Eye or whatever it is. Yeah, you're right. It's small time.
Yeah, you don't tend to see these little shops.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And the cast themselves are all really good, but it's a weird cast, I kept thinking. You know, like, what an odd film what an odd film in general to have gotten. Gemma Arterton. I think she's really good, but she's in a certain type of British films that you wouldn't necessarily see with Glenn Close, and then Paddy Considine. It is a weird ensemble cast that they've assembled as well for a genre film as well, and it's
very strong cast though.
Amazing, all of them are brilliant.
Yeah,
everyone involved is brilliant. Yeah.
And Senia Nanua as Melanie
she's amazing,
outstanding.
Yeah, she steals it. I think
is it her first feature film? I think
it is. Yeah,
I think what she deals with and what she gets across is outstanding. You get that slightly robotic feel that you're not quite sure how human the character is right at the very, very beginning. Yeah, but I think you start to realize that what is happening is she is behaving as she knows a polite child should behave. Yes, I think she's exceptional. Yeah, I love the character of Melanie. I think she's wonderful. Yeah, and I think, like I say, I think as a performance, I think she does an amazing job.
I think they do deliberately play with that idea of like the creepy kid in horror films, and that kind of slight uncanny nature of her, and the way sometimes she'll say a line, oh hello Miss Justinu, and it is a little bit like The Shining or something, and then other times she'll be genuinely warm and emotional, and it is all of these characters don't know how to feel about her or how to react to her, and I think we're kind of on that same journey in a way.
It's brilliantly done, that, isn't it? When she reminds them of the health and safety protocols and stuff, and she's like, "Oh, you forgot to do this strap up or whatever," and it's like
you just know she's the smartest character in the group, basically. Yeah,
and it does. And again, you think perhaps what's going to happen. You think perhaps what's going to happen is that she's going to be this real terrible threat who's violent and whatever else, but it just does something that bit more interesting, doesn't it? It doesn't go down that road. And I love this strange lull after she's fed. I love the performance of that.
When she kind of starts to kind of drift off almost. Yeah.
It's like I don't know, it's like she's totally sated. She's she's eaten all she needs to eat, and now she's gonna just fall into a sleep or something.
It goes into like a dreamlike slumber or something, doesn't it, when that happens?
Almost verges on like a depression.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
a symptom of depression. Almost that sort of real flatness, perhaps.
Yes. And I did think that as well with one of the times that happened, like this kind of almost element of shame that she has. Yes,
exactly.
Yes,
I think it's fascinating. And one of the little moment of ethics that I thought was very interesting in her behaviour and her character is the moment she gets the cat. So she finds this black cat which crosses her path, which I think is a lovely little gothic nod, isn't it? Like, and she gets the cat and she eats the cat, and she's just doing it because she's hungry, and there's no, like you said, there is a sense of remorse in her actions afterwards, but she didn't stop herself at any point. Yeah. And then in the next scene, she finds a dog.
Yes.
And I think the first thought is, right, that dog's for it. Yeah. That's it. But what she actually does is take the dog.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is interesting because when I watched that the second time, I was like, what she ends up doing is using the dog as a lure for the zombies.
Yes.
She ends up, and the dog is sort of chased off by the hungries.
Yeah.
But when I watched it, it felt almost, the second time, it almost felt as if she just wanted a dog.
Yeah, right.
Like she was taking it to be a pet as part of this dysfunctional family.
She just wanted to take it back with her. Yeah, I agree.
And then she almost forgets that, oh no, actually they're going to chase it, aren't they? I don't know if I've misread that completely.
No, I think I thought that to begin with because I'd forgotten what it was she ended up doing with the dog, and I thought, she wants a dog. She grabbed a dog. Yeah.
Your first thought is, right, that dog's in trouble. It's going to get eaten.
I'm sure there's definitely that element of it. We're supposed to think either way, isn't there? Because there is that, she's a little girl, and she's got her family, and there's these moments when she finds a doll, and there's I think she wants that. She wants that real life domesticity or whatever, doesn't she? Yeah.
I love those moments when they're first free as well, and she's looking at the landscape. I just think
it's great.
Again, I think there would be a clumsy way in the script for her to tell us and go, "Oh, I'm so amazed with what I'm seeing." But I just think her performance is really sensational.
Yeah, that's the one thing I do love actually about because I think you're right. I think there's something to be said about maybe of keeping the whole film inside that facility, but the moment when she first bursts out and there's that sort of pandemonium going on outside and everything kind of opens up and brightens for the first time, and her reaction to it, and the kind of, I do think that's a lovely moment as well. Yeah, and the way she reacts to the outside world. Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating film, and I can see why for a lot of people it is. It's maybe not the kind of crowd pleasing watch that some people might want just from a zombie film, because even the end is kind of anticlimactic. She doesn't kill anyone, like you say, in a kind of savage way or a dramatic way. She just lights a tree on fire, and that's it. You know, and it's just a low key movie, and in the same way as Pontypool, in some ways, these movies don't quite give you maybe what you want from a typical zombie movie.
There's not a lot of agency in terms of the deaths.
No,
it
not
seems
at all.
like she could. I mean, with the main characters, obviously, obviously the Hungries, who are sort of, you know, the zombies in the same way that lots of zombies function in other films. But the main characters, none of them have a massive amount of agency in their own deaths.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's true.
So that's interesting, isn't it? And again, when you feel that Melanie's going to take, perhaps going to turn on Dr. Caldwell, and she doesn't, is that unsatisfying? I think if she did that, that would be a problem for the film.
Yeah,
because she then would be a monster.
I think it works for me. It does. Again, it depends what you want from your zombie film or what you want from that film, doesn't it? But I'm more than happy to go with kind of interesting, consistent character and world building for this particular film more than the visceral thrills that.
It's completely in keeping with her character, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it is definitely, and that is a very disturbing but kind of bittersweet ending in some ways, isn't it? It's a fascinating ending. But
you get Sergeant Parks' sort of last monologue about his, I think it's about his wife or something, isn't it? And then suddenly he turns and then she does shoot him, doesn't she? And so there's that, you know, that's slightly, but even that's bittersweet, isn't it? It's not kind of like, oh, good, I'm glad he's dead.
No, not at all. She was quite upset, I think, wasn't she? Yeah. She was angry that he got out and that he got infected. And it's an interesting film. I think there's more to it than meets the eye initially, which is what's really nice. Yeah.
It's worth it. I think it's worth a watch, and I think it's worth a rewatch.
Yeah.
Because I liked it more the second time.
I did as well. Agreed. Yeah, definitely. I watched it at Fright Fest, and I think maybe, it's a great film, but maybe it wasn't quite the right film for Fright Fest in some ways, you know? It was interesting. I mean, I still loved it, but it's not necessarily that kind of high octane. It was on at the same festival as Train to Busan, and Train to Busan is absolutely that kind of high octane, scary, visceral zombie movie that you might want as a crowd pleaser. But Girl with All the Gifts has got other ideas.
It's a quieter thing.
It is.
And I think we can tell a lot from a horror film by its soundtrack.
Oh yeah.
And like I say, I adore that soundtrack.
Yeah.
But it is very lulling.
Yes.
Isn't it? It's beautiful. I really rate it. Agreed. I really like it.
Amazing. All right. Well, that's about. I mean, I feel like these two films. There's so much to be said. We could keep going, but we won't. Adam, thank you so much for joining me.
Mike.
This has been amazing. Last question for you. What's your favourite zombie movie?
Oh, good question. Depending on the company I'm in, determines my answer. I reckon. I think in terms of enjoyment, Wreck is my favorite horror. It is my favorite zombie movie. It's fun. It's fast paced. It's innovative. Yeah. You get that real kick of, as I say, mythology at the end with that creepy moment and the creepy thing. I think it's fantastic. I also have a real soft spot for Night of the Living Dead, though.
Yeah.
I think it's a classic, and I think it's the first zombie film that I ever saw, and it's certainly at one point in my life, it's what a horror film meant to me.
Yes.
Night of the Living Dead is what a horror film is, and
that's really interesting.
So it's kind of a toss up, really.
Yeah. Amazing. And where can people find you out there if they want to come find you online and that kind of thing?
I'm on Twitter, Adam_Z, Z-E-D, Adam @Adam_Z.
Lovely.
And my website is adamzrobinson.com, where you can hear all about my theatre work and writing and stuff like that, and that's all on there. So yeah, come and say hello. Amazing. And come and tell me all of the things I got completely wrong.
Don't worry, they will. Yeah.
Oh no, I love an expert.
Yeah.
I'm like the anti-Gove. Yeah. I've got a load of time for experts. So come and tell me everything that I got wrong.
Oh, amazing! Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to my brilliant guest, Adam Robinson. Oh, those two movies. I mean, are there two smarter, more rich, more textured, more layered zombie movies out there than these two? I don't think so. What do you think of these two movies? What do you make of Pontypool and that ending? What does it mean? Please do get in touch and send us your thoughts. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Letterboxd. Don't forget, Letterboxd is where you can find out which films we're going to be covering for the rest of the series and in the future. There is also a discussion group that's called the Evolution of Horror Discussion Group, where you can discuss the genre, you can discuss movies, you can discuss the meaning of Pontypool with fellow listeners. That can be found on Facebook. If you want to become a patron of the Evolution of Horror and donate $5 per month to receive weekly bonus content and get discounts on merchandise and get an Evolution of Horror sticker, then simply go to patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. There are still a handful of Evolution of Horror t-shirts left. If you want to get hold of one, we now ship internationally to all over the world, so anyone can buy themselves a t-shirt. Simply go to evolutionofhorror.com. You can find all episodes of this podcast on our website, evolutionofhorror.com, including a whole series on slashers, a whole series on ghost stories, a whole series on folk horror, and a whole lot of other bonus episodes. And you can find this podcast and subscribe to this podcast on all major podcast platforms and apps. If you get a chance, please do subscribe. Please do tell your friends and family about us. Please do spread the word, spread the love. And if you can spare a minute, please do drop us a little rating or review, preferably a nice positive one. It just helps get the podcast discovered by new listeners. So, onwards and upwards. Where are we going to next? Well, I'm really excited about next week. Next week, we're covering a movie that, well, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of debate. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people disputing whether or not this is a zombie movie and whether it belongs in this series. But the problem I have with this movie is it kind of doesn't really belong anywhere, or it kind of belongs everywhere. It's kind of the ultimate horror movie. You couldn't put it in a box. You couldn't give it a subgenre because it essentially contains every single horror movie monster and trope imaginable. Next week, I'm going to be joined by two guests, Becky Dark and Rob Watts, and we are going to sit and discuss Joss Whedon and Drew Goddard's The Cabin in the Woods from 2012. Oh my God, I'm so excited. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.